The Diana Foster story. Diana Foster had 72 hours left to live when she finally broke the promise she'd made to her dying mother 40 years ago. The secret she'd carried since childhood could save her from the electric chair, but it would destroy the Catholic Church's most beloved saint. Father Miguel Santos didn't die the way everyone thinks, she whispered to her lawyer. My mother killed him, and I know why. Welcome to Justice System USA, where we bring you the untold stories of America's legal system. Before we continue with Diana's incredible story of childhood promises, religious authority, and the secret that could save a life or destroy a legacy, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories of truth confronting power deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter, and your support helps us keep bringing them to light. The Child's Burden. August 15, 1985. Phoenix, Arizona. 8-year-old Diana Foster knelt beside her mother's hospital bed, her small hand clutching Maria Foster's frail fingers. Cancer had ravaged the 34-year-old woman's body over the past 6 months, but her eyes still burned with the fierce protectiveness that had defined her as a mother. The sterile hospital room smelled of antiseptic and impending death. Maria had perhaps hours left, and she was using them to burden her young daughter with a secret that would haunt Diana for the next 4 decades. Listen to me carefully, Mia, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic beeping of machines keeping her alive. What I'm about to tell you, you can never repeat. Not to anyone. Not ever. Diana nodded solemnly. Though at 8 years old, she couldn't possibly understand the weight of what her mother was about to ask of her. Father Miguel Santos, Maria continued, her grip tightening on Diana's hand. The priest who died last month. Everyone thinks it was a heart attack, but it wasn't. Diana remembered Father Santos well. He had been the beloved priest at St. Joseph's Catholic Church, where the Foster family attended Mass every Sunday. He was young for a priest, maybe 35, with kind eyes and a gentle manner with children. The entire parish had mourned when he died. Suddenly, in his rectory, I killed him, Maria said, the words hitting Diana like physical blows. I killed him because of what he did to you. The 8-year-old girl stared at her mother in confusion and growing horror. She remembered the times Father Santos had asked her to help clean the church after school, the special attention he paid her during confession, the way he would touch her shoulders and sometimes her legs during their private conversations. Diana had never told anyone about those touches, about how they made her feel confused and scared. Children, especially children in devout Catholic families, don't easily question the actions of priests. Authority figures are to be trusted, respected, obeyed. But Maria Foster had noticed changes in her daughter's behavior. The nightmares, the sudden fear of going to church, the way Diana would freeze when Father Santos was mentioned. As a mother, Maria had sensed something was wrong, and when she finally coaxed the truth from Diana, her protective instincts had overridden everything else. He was hurting you, Maria continued, tears streaming down her gaunt face. Hurting you in ways no child should be hurt. I couldn't let him do it anymore. I couldn't let him hurt you or any other children. Diana's memories of that night were fragmented, viewed through the lens of childhood trauma. She remembered her mother leaving the house late at night, supposedly to pray at the church. She remembered waking up to find Maria washing blood from her clothes. She remembered the announcement at Sunday Mass that Father Santos had died of a heart attack. Promise me, Diana, Maria said urgently, her voice gaining strength despite her failing body. Promise me you'll never tell anyone what really happened. Promise me you'll take this secret to your grave. The dying woman's eyes bore into her daughter's, and Diana saw desperation there that scared her more than anything else that had happened. But Mama, Diana whispered, what if someone asks? No one will ask, Maria interrupted. No one suspects anything. Father Santos is dead, and that's all that matters. But if you ever tell anyone what I did, it won't bring me back. It will just destroy our family's name and dishonor his memory in the eyes of the church. Diana didn't understand the full implications of what her mother was asking, but she understood the urgency, the fear, and the love behind the request. This was her dying mother's final wish. I promise, Mama, Diana said, though the words felt like stones in her throat. I promise I'll never tell. Maria Foster died 6 hours later, taking her crime to the grave and leaving her 8-year-old daughter to carry a secret that would grow heavier with each passing year. The saint's rise. Father Miguel Santos' death was mourned throughout the Phoenix Catholic community and beyond. In the weeks following his passing, stories began to emerge about his extraordinary compassion and dedication to helping disadvantaged children. Parish members shared testimonies about his volunteer work at local orphanages, his financial support for struggling families, and his special ministry to children who had suffered trauma. The Catholic Church began documenting these accounts as part of a process that would eventually lead to sainthood. Miracles were attributed to prayers made in Father Santos' name. Healing occurred in situations where medical science offered no hope. His grave became a pilgrimage site for faithful Catholics seeking intercession. Diana Foster, growing up in the shadow of her mother's secret, watched this canonization process with growing horror. The man who had violated her innocence was being celebrated as a holy figure. Her mother, who had killed to protect her, was forgotten while her victim was being transformed into a saint. The psychological toll on Diana was enormous. She attended the same church where Father Santos had abused her, listening to sermons that praised his memory. She participated in masses where his intercession was sought for the protection of children, the same children he had preyed upon. In life, as Diana grew older, she began to understand the full scope of what her mother had done, and what she herself had promised to keep secret. Maria Foster hadn't just killed a man, she had eliminated someone the Catholic Church was elevating to sainthood. The institutional implications were staggering. By the time Diana reached adulthood, Father Miguel Santos was well on his way to canonization. The Catholic Church had invested enormous resources in documenting his life and works. His sainthood had become a source of pride for the Phoenix Diocese and the broader American Catholic community. Diana carried her burden alone, unable to share it with anyone. She couldn't tell her father, who had remarried and started a new family. She couldn't tell friends, who wouldn't understand the complexity of her situation. She couldn't tell therapists, who would be legally obligated to report what they learned. The secret isolated her, made relationships difficult, and contributed to a pattern of depression and anxiety that would follow her throughout her life. But Diana kept her promise, even as it slowly destroyed her ability to trust institutions, authority figures, and sometimes even herself. A life unraveled. Diana Foster's adult life was shaped by the secret she carried and the trauma she had endured as a child. She struggled with relationships, finding it difficult to trust men and impossible to explain her discomfort around religious authority. She moved frequently, unable to settle in communities where churches played central roles. She worked a series of jobs: waitress, retail clerk, administrative assistant, never staying anywhere long enough to build deep connections or career stability. The secret created a barrier between Diana and the world that she couldn't cross without breaking her promise to her dying mother. In 2019, at the age of 42, Diana was living in a small apartment in Tucson, working nights at a casino and struggling with depression. Her isolation had deepened over the years, and she had few close relationships. The burden of her secret had become almost unbearable, especially as news reports continued to celebrate Father Santos approaching canonization. It was during this lowest period of her life that Diana met Marcus Blake, a regular customer at the casino where she worked. Marcus was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in Diana, despite her guarded nature. For the first time in years, Diana began to hope that she might be able to build a normal relationship. What Diana didn't know was that Marcus Blake was involved in drug trafficking and had been using the casino to launder money. When their relationship developed, he began pressuring Diana to help with his schemes. Using her access to casino systems and her desperate need for connection, Diana initially refused, but Marcus was skilled at manipulation. He threatened to leave her, played on her fears of being alone, and gradually drew her into activities she knew were wrong. The same isolation that her secret had created made her vulnerable to his influence. The relationship became abusive, with Marcus controlling Diana's movements, finances, and social connections. He convinced her that she was worthless, that no one else would ever care about her, and that helping with his criminal activities was the only way to prove her love. Diana's involvement began small, allowing Marcus to use her apartment for meetings, providing information about casino security procedures, helping to move small amounts of money. But Marcus's demands escalated, and Diana found herself trapped in a criminal conspiracy she neither understood nor wanted to be part of. The murder. On March 15, 2020, Diana's world collapsed completely. Marcus Blake was found dead in her apartment, shot 3 times in the chest. Diana was discovered by police, covered in blood, and holding the murder weapon. Her fingerprints were on the gun, gunpowder residue was on her hands, and she had no alibi for the time of death. The prosecution's case against Diana was overwhelming. They painted her as a desperate woman who had killed her boyfriend during a domestic dispute, possibly over his criminal activities or their troubled relationship. Physical evidence supported their theory, and Diana's behavior during police questioning seemed to confirm her guilt. Diana told police that she had found Marcus dead when she returned home from work, but her story was inconsistent and unconvincing. Security cameras showed her entering the apartment building at the time of the murder, and neighbors reported hearing arguing, followed by gunshots. What Diana couldn't explain, what she couldn't tell anyone, was that she hadn't killed Marcus Blake. She had found him dead, just as she claimed, but she had picked up the gun and held it because she was in shock. In her traumatized state, she had contaminated the crime scene and created evidence that made her appear guilty. The real killer was someone connected to Marcus's drug trafficking activities, someone who had eliminated him for reasons related to their criminal enterprise, but Diana had no knowledge of these connections, no understanding of the criminal world Marcus had drawn her into, and no way to explain what had really happened without revealing information she didn't possess. During her trial, Diana's defense attorney, Jennifer Stone, tried to present her as a victim of domestic abuse who had been manipulated by Marcus Blake, but the physical evidence was too strong, and Diana's inability to provide a convincing alternative theory of the crime made her defense weak. The prosecution successfully argued that Diana Foster was a cold-blooded killer who had murdered her boyfriend in a fit of rage. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. Diana was sentenced to death and sent to death row at the Arizona State Prison Complex, where she would spend the next 5 years, awaiting execution while her appeals slowly worked their way through the court system. Death row revelation. Life on death row was a special kind of hell for Diana Foster. She was housed in a small cell for 23 hours a day, allowed 1 hour of exercise in a caged yard, and permitted limited contact with visitors and attorneys. The other women on death row were hardened criminals who had committed horrific acts. Diana, who had never been violent before her arrest, struggled to survive in this environment, but death row also provided something Diana had never experienced before: time to think without the distractions of daily survival. For 5 years, she reflected on her life, her choices, and the secret that had shaped everything since childhood. As her execution date approached, Diana began to understand that her promise to her dying mother might have been based on fear rather than love. Maria Foster had been a victim herself, a mother trying to protect her daughter from a predator. Her request for secrecy had been born from desperation and a desire to shield Diana from scandal, not from any rational assessment of what would be best for her daughter's future. Diana also realized that her silence had allowed Father Santos's legacy to flourish unchallenged. The Catholic Church had invested enormous resources in his canonization, and millions of faithful Catholics now prayed to a man who had been a child abuser. Her mother's secret had protected the very institution that had failed to protect Diana as a child. The turning point came when Diana learned that Father Miguel Santos was scheduled for official canonization in 6 months. The ceremony would be held at the Vatican, with Pope Francis himself presiding over the elevation of the Phoenix priest to sainthood. Diana would be executed before the canonization, taking her mother's secret to the grave as promised. But watching the news coverage of the approaching canonization, Diana finally understood the full scope of the injustice her silence had enabled. Father Santos was being celebrated as a protector of children while she sat on death row for a crime she didn't commit. Her mother's attempt to shield her from scandal had ultimately led to a greater scandal, the elevation of a predator to sainthood. Diana requested a meeting with her appeals attorney, Jennifer Stone, 3 days before her scheduled execution. Stone had been working on Diana's case for years, convinced that there were irregularities in the investigation and trial, but unable to identify specific grounds for appeal. "There's something I need to tell you," Diana said during their final meeting, "something I've never told anyone, something that might change everything." Stone leaned forward, recognizing the gravity in Diana's voice. After 5 years of maintaining her innocence, without providing alternative theories, Diana was finally ready to share information that could be crucial to her case. "Father Miguel Santos," Diana began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The priest who's about to become a saint. He didn't die of a heart attack. My mother killed him in 1985, and she made me promise never to tell anyone why. Asterisk, the secret revealed. Over the next 2 hours, Diana told Jennifer Stone everything she had kept hidden for 40 years. She described Father Santos' abuse, her mother's discovery of the truth, and the promise that had defined Diana's entire adult life. She explained how the secret had isolated her, made her vulnerable to Marcus Blake's manipulation, and ultimately contributed to her ending up on death row. Stone listened in stunned silence as Diana revealed information that could potentially halt her execution and reopen questions about one of the Catholic Church's newest saints. But she also understood the enormous implications of what Diana was sharing. Diana, Stone said carefully, if what you're telling me is true, this changes everything. But you understand that revealing this information will destroy Father Santos' reputation and potentially cause a scandal that could damage the Catholic Church worldwide. I understand, Diana replied. I've spent 40 years protecting a secret that was protecting the wrong person. My mother killed a predator, but her silence allowed him to become a saint. I can't let that happen, even if it means breaking my promise to her. Stone immediately began working to verify Diana's claims. She contacted investigators to re-examine the circumstances of Father Santos' death, requested access to medical records from 1985, and began building a case for stays of execution based on new evidence. But the timeline was impossibly tight. Diana's execution was scheduled for 72 hours away, and the legal system moved slowly even in emergency situations. Stone filed motions for stays, reached out to media outlets, and contacted advocates who might be able to pressure officials to delay the execution. Meanwhile, Diana faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could maintain her silence, keep her promise to her dying mother, and face execution as planned. Or she could break that promise, potentially save her own life, but destroy the legacy of a man millions of Catholics revered as a saint. The weight of the decision was enormous. Diana wasn't just choosing between life and death. She was choosing between honoring her mother's memory and exposing the truth about institutional failure and religious corruption. The investigation reopened. Jennifer Stone's emergency motions caught the attention of Detective Amanda Clark, who had recently been assigned to a cold case unit specializing in historical crimes. Clark was intrigued by Diana's claims about Father Santos and began her own investigation into the priest's death. The original investigation in 1985 had been perfunctory. Father Santos was found dead in his rectory, apparently from a heart attack. No autopsy had been performed because there were no signs of foul play, and the Catholic Church had discouraged extensive investigation out of respect for the deceased priest. But Detective Clark's review of the case files revealed several inconsistencies that had been overlooked. Father Santos had been young and healthy, with no history of heart problems. The rectory had been cleaned thoroughly before investigators arrived, which was unusual for a sudden death. Most importantly, there had been no medical examiner's determination of cause of death, just an assumption. Based on the absence of obvious trauma, Clark requested exhumation of Father Santos' remains, despite objections from the Catholic Church, and protests from faithful Catholics who viewed the request as desecration of a holy figure. The exhumation required court orders and became a media sensation, with religious groups protesting outside the courthouse. The forensic examination of Father Santos' remains, conducted with modern techniques not available in 1985, revealed evidence that supported Diana's claims. The priest had died from blunt force trauma to the head, not from a heart attack. The injuries were consistent with being struck multiple times with a heavy object. More importantly, toxicology tests revealed traces of a sedative in Father Santos' remains. Maria Foster had worked as a nurse before Diana's birth and would have had access to medications that could incapacitate someone before killing them. The physical evidence corroborated Diana's account of her mother's crime, but Detective Clark needed more proof to build a case that could save Diana's life. She began investigating Father Santos' background, looking for evidence of the abuse Diana had described. What Clark discovered was a pattern of behavior that the Catholic Church had apparently covered up for decades. Other former parishioners, now adults, came forward with accounts of inappropriate behavior by Father Santos. Records showed that the church had received complaints about the priest but had handled them internally without involving law enforcement. The emerging picture was of a serial predator who had used his position of authority to abuse children, while the institution that employed him looked the other way. Maria Foster hadn't just killed a priest, she had eliminated someone who posed an ongoing threat to children throughout the community. The Church's response. As news of Diana's revelations spread, the Catholic Church found itself facing a crisis that threatened one of its most celebrated canonization processes. The Vatican had invested enormous resources in Father Santos' path to sainthood, and his elevation had been planned as a celebration of American Catholic faith. Archbishop William Hayes, who oversaw the Phoenix Diocese, initially dismissed Diana's claims as the desperate lies of a convicted murderer trying to avoid execution. He pointed to Father Santos' documented works of charity and the miracles attributed to his intercession as evidence of his holiness. But as Detective Clark's investigation uncovered more evidence of abuse and cover-up, the Church's position became increasingly difficult to maintain. Internal documents revealed that Church officials had been aware of complaints against Father Santos, but had transferred him between parishes rather than reporting him to authorities. The scandal grew when other victims came forward, emboldened by Diana's courage in breaking her silence. Men and women who had been children during Father Santos' ministry began sharing their own stories of abuse, creating a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The Catholic Church faced an impossible choice: proceed with the canonization despite mounting evidence of Father Santos' crimes, or halt the process and acknowledge that they had nearly elevated a predator to sainthood. Either decision would cause enormous damage to the Church's credibility and authority. Pope Francis, who had championed transparency and accountability in addressing clerical abuse, made the difficult decision to suspend Father Santos' canonization pending a thorough investigation. The announcement sent shockwaves through the Catholic world and vindicated Diana's decision to break her silence. But the Church's response came just 24 hours before Diana's scheduled execution, leaving little time for legal proceedings to save her life. The final hours, with less than a day remaining before her execution, Diana Foster found herself at the center of a media firestorm that had grown far beyond her personal case. Religious leaders, victims' rights advocates, legal experts, and government officials were all weighing in on whether she should be executed for a crime she claimed not to have committed, while revealing information about historical crimes that had been covered up for decades. Jennifer Stone filed a final appeal based on the new evidence about Father Santos and the potential impact on Diana's case. She argued that Diana's revelations about her mother's crime created reasonable doubt about her own guilt in Marcus Blake's murder, particularly given the lack of clear motive and the inconsistencies in the original investigation. The governor of Arizona, facing enormous pressure from both sides, agreed to review Diana's case personally. Protesters gathered outside the state capitol, with some demanding justice for Diana and others insisting that her claims about Father Santos were lies designed to save her own life. Diana spent her final day in prison writing letters to the other victims of Father Santos who had found the courage to come forward. She thanked them for their bravery and apologized for the years of silence that had allowed the priest's reputation to flourish. "I kept my mother's secret because I thought I was honoring her memory," Diana wrote. "But I realize now that the greatest honor I can give her is to ensure that her sacrifice in protecting me wasn't in vain. She killed a predator, and the world deserves to know the truth." 18 hours before her scheduled execution, Diana received word that the governor had granted her a temporary reprieve pending further investigation. The decision was based not on certainty of her innocence, but on recognition that the new evidence about Father Santos raised questions that deserved thorough examination. Justice delayed, truth revealed. Diana Foster's reprieve led to a comprehensive review of both her case and the circumstances surrounding Father Santos' death. Detective Clark's investigation expanded to include multiple jurisdictions where the priest had served, uncovering a pattern of abuse that spanned decades and affected dozens of victims. The Catholic Church, facing mounting evidence of institutional failure, agreed to cooperate with law enforcement investigations and to provide financial compensation to Father Santos' victims. The canonization process was permanently suspended, and the Church issued a formal apology for the failures that had allowed the abuse to continue. Diana's conviction for Marcus Blake's murder was overturned when new evidence emerged about his drug trafficking activities, and the criminal associates who had likely killed him. The real killers were never identified, but the lack of credible evidence against Diana led to her release after 5 years on death row. The psychological toll of her experience was enormous, but Diana found purpose in advocating for other victims of clerical abuse and working to reform the systems that had failed to protect children. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting survivors and ensuring that institutional cover-ups could no longer silence victims. Maria Foster's crime was never officially prosecuted. She had been dead for nearly 40 years, but her actions were finally understood in their proper context. She hadn't murdered a holy man. She had eliminated a predator who was threatening her daughter and other children in their community. The legacy of broken promises. Diana Foster's story became a watershed moment in discussions about institutional accountability, the protection of children, and the courage required to challenge powerful organizations. Her decision to break a 40-year-old promise to her dying mother had saved her own life, while exposing a scandal that reached the highest levels of the Catholic Church. The case led to reforms in how allegations of clerical abuse are investigated, and how the Catholic Church vets candidates for sainthood. It also highlighted the long-term psychological damage that institutional abuse can cause, not just to direct victims but to families and communities that are forced to carry secrets and shame. Diana's experience on death row became part of broader discussions about capital punishment and the possibility of executing innocent people. Her case demonstrated how complex circumstances and institutional failures could combine to create miscarriages of justice that might only be discovered years later. Most importantly, Diana's story illustrated the power of truth to overcome even the most powerful institutions and the longest-held secrets. Her mother's dying wish to keep the secret had been motivated by love and fear, but Diana's decision to break that promise was motivated by justice and courage. "I spent 40 years thinking I was honoring my mother by keeping her secret," Diana said during a television interview after her release. "But I finally realized that the greatest honor I could give her was to make sure her sacrifice had meaning. She died protecting me from a predator. The least I could do was protect other children from his legacy." The Catholic Church's handling of the Father Santos case became a model for how institutions should respond when confronted with evidence of historical abuse and cover-ups. While the damage to the Church's credibility was significant, its willingness to acknowledge mistakes and implement reforms was seen as a step toward greater accountability, a mother's true legacy. Today, Diana Foster works as an advocate for abuse survivors and speaks regularly about the importance of breaking silence around institutional abuse. The foundation she established has helped dozens of victims find their voices and seek justice for crimes that had been hidden for decades. She keeps a photograph of her mother on her desk, not the dying woman who asked her to keep a terrible secret, but a younger Maria Foster holding baby Diana with obvious love and protection. It reminds her that her mother's true legacy wasn't the promise she extracted, but the courage she showed in protecting her daughter when the systems that should have kept Diana safe had failed. The Catholic Church continues to grapple with the implications of the Father Santos case and its near canonization of a known predator. The incident has become part of training programs for church officials and a cautionary tale about the dangers of institutional loyalty overriding moral responsibility. Diana never married or had children of her own, but she considers the abuse survivors she works with to be her extended family. Many of them are people who found the courage to speak up because Diana had shown them that even the longest-held secrets could be challenged, and even the most powerful institutions could be forced to confront the truth. "My mother asked me to take her secret to my grave," Diana reflects. "I almost did, but I learned that some promises are meant to be broken, especially when keeping them means protecting the wrong people. The truth doesn't always set you free immediately, but it's the only foundation for real justice." The case of Diana Foster reminds us that the most dangerous secrets are often the ones we keep to protect institutions that should be protecting us. Her story proves that it's never too late to speak truth to power, even when that truth challenges everything we've been taught to believe about authority, faith, and family loyalty. What would you have done in Diana's position? When faced with choosing between a deathbed promise and exposing the truth about institutional abuse, when keeping silence means protecting predators while breaking it means dishonoring your mother's memory, how do you decide? Share your thoughts in the comments below. and let us know what city you're watching from today. If this story moved you, subscribe to Justice System USA. We're committed to sharing the complex stories of courage, institutional accountability, and the price of truth within America's legal system. Every subscription helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Stories that challenge us to examine the systems we trust and the promises we make. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most sacred promise is the one to protect the innocent, even when it means breaking the promises we made to protect the guilty. Diana Foster learned that truth the hard way, but her courage in the final hours saved not just her own life, but potentially countless other children who might have fallen victim to a system that protected predators over the vulnerable.